Welcome to True Echo, where real strength isn't always loud, and justice sometimes begins in silence. In today's gripping story, a black woman walks into a prestigious bank, quietly dressed but powerfully positioned, the CEO of a billion-dollar firm. But when a teller throws her ID on the floor like trash, no one intervenes. What happens next will change the bank forever. The ID card didn't fall. It was thrown, a flick of the wrist, a quiet act of contempt masked as protocol. Natalie Coleman didn't move immediately. She stood, watching it spin on the cold marble like a coin deciding someone's worth. Then came the silence. Not the respectful kind reserved for solemn moments, but the heavy, loaded kind. The kind that says, she probably deserved it. Around her, whispers slithered beneath the surface of a pristine corporate lobby, but not a single voice rose in her defense. Natalie was used to being underestimated. Her plain navy suit didn't scream wealth. Her shoes, scuffed from work, didn't whisper status. But her silence, that was deliberate. Every breath was measured. She bent down, retrieved her ID from the floor with a grace that demanded attention, and locked eyes with the teller, Jessica, whose smile was as cold as the vaults behind her. "I'll wait for someone who can process this professionally," Natalie said quietly. Jessica didn't flinch. She turned to her screen as if Natalie were fog on glass. Behind the glass walls of Stratton Financial's flagship Raleigh branch, the truth shimmered. Natalie Coleman wasn't just another customer. She was the CEO of Coleman Construction Group, and the signed partner in a $2.3 billion infrastructure development deal with that very bank. But no one here knew. No one had asked. And no one cared enough to find out. She hadn't come in designer labels. She hadn't walked in with an entourage. Natalie had come alone, expecting professionalism, and left holding silence like a weight. But silence, when paired with power, can become the sharpest blade. She would be back. Natalie stood just outside the Stratton Financial building, the weight of humiliation pressing against her like the humidity clinging to Raleigh's summer afternoon. She could have walked away. She could have gone to another bank, deposited the certified check elsewhere, and closed her account without explanation. But if she walked away silently, she would validate every quiet dismissal, every look that said, "You don't belong here." No. This wasn't just about her now. It was about something bigger. Back at her office, she sat at the long walnut conference table surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city she'd helped build. Natalie had started Coleman Construction Group from a one-bedroom apartment with 2 interns and a dream. A decade later, she had government contracts, Fortune 500 partnerships, and a balance sheet strong enough to make banks compete for her attention. She opened her laptop and pulled up the digital file labeled, Stratton Partnership, Final. A $2.3 billion agreement, fully signed and countersigned by Michael Andrews, Stratton's regional VP. That check she tried to deposit? It was the first disbursement from that very deal. She stared at the signature line for a moment. Natalie Coleman, Chief Executive Officer. Then, she made a decision. Natalie wasn't going to yell. She wasn't going to tweet about it. And she wasn't going to play into their perception of what angry looked like. No, she was going to move with precision. She scheduled a meeting request to Stratton Financial's regional office. Urgent. Confidential. Directly with Michael Andrews. The next morning, she didn't wear the plain navy blazer. She wore black, tailored, sharp, powerful. Her heels clicked like metronomes against the marble as she re-entered the same bank lobby. This time, heads turned. Ashley, the receptionist who had once waved her away like background noise, did a double take. "I'd like to speak to Mr. Kent," Natalie said smoothly. Ashley blinked. "Mr. Kent is, busy. May I ask what this is about?" Natalie didn't flinch. She pulled a pristine white card from her leather portfolio and slid it across the counter. Ashley glanced down and went still. Her eyes darted back up. The card read. Natalie Coleman. Chief Executive Officer. Coleman Construction Group. Ashley's lips parted slightly. "One moment please." Within minutes, Thomas Kent appeared, visibly rattled. "Miss Coleman. Please come with me." She followed him through a glass-paneled hallway into his corner office. He closed the door. "I had no idea, yesterday, if I'd known," he stammered. "I'm not here for apologies," Natalie interrupted gently. "I'm here to show you something." She pulled out the file folder. Inside, the full contract. Signed by his own regional executive. Thomas scanned the first page, his face blanching. Then the second, then the signature line. "This is real," he whispered. "Very real," Natalie replied. "And if I choose to terminate this partnership because of how your staff treated me, if I decide your bank is not aligned with our values, you'll be the reason why." His throat bobbed. Natalie stood. "I'll be meeting with Mr. Andrews this afternoon. I suggest you prepare yourself. This is not over." And with that, she walked out, heels echoing like a drumbeat of reckoning. The silence she'd endured yesterday. It was about to be replaced by consequences. The elevator to the top floor of Stratton Financial moved slower than Natalie expected. As she rose, so did the pressure, not on her, but on the institution that had underestimated the wrong woman. When the doors opened, Natalie stepped into a hallway dressed in muted grays and polished chrome. The receptionist on the executive floor greeted her with a nervous smile, her eyes scanning Natalie's name on the calendar. "Right this way, Miss Coleman. Mr. Andrews is expecting you." Inside the conference room, sunlight poured in from a glass wall that overlooked downtown Raleigh. Michael Andrews, tall and impeccably dressed, rose from his chair. "Miss Coleman," he said, extending a hand, "I understand there's been a serious issue." Natalie didn't shake it right away. Instead, she set the thick file down on the table between them. "This is the $2.3 billion contract Coleman Construction Group signed with Stratton Financial," she said, her voice steady. "It includes bank authorizations, verified check disbursements, and signatures, yours and mine." Andrews blinked. Slowly, he opened the file and began to read. The deeper he went, the more his posture shifted. First alert. Then stiff. Then fully alert. "I was humiliated at your flagship branch," Natalie said, finally sitting across from him. "Your employees treated me like a criminal. I was mocked, ignored, and denied a basic transaction, not because of protocol, but because of how I looked." He didn't interrupt. Her words landed with force. "I didn't come here to rant. And I'm not asking for an apology," she continued. "I came to see whether Stratton Financial understands what's at stake when character is absent from policy." Michael leaned back, one hand rubbing his chin. "I can assure you I was unaware of." "I know you didn't know," Natalie cut in. "That's the problem. And if you didn't know how your team treats people who don't look like your ideal client, how can I trust your institution to steward one of the largest public-private partnerships in this state?" The room went still. Michael looked down at the documents again, his signature in bold black ink. Then he looked up. This time, something had changed in his expression. Less defense. More shame. "I will look into this immediately," he said. "I hope you will," Natalie said as she stood. "Because if nothing changes, if the people responsible aren't held accountable, you won't just lose Coleman Construction. You'll lose our trust. And after that, it doesn't matter how much money you have in your vaults." She left the room without another word. By the time she returned to her car, emails were already being sent. Meetings were being scheduled. And across the city, the weight of one act, the ID card thrown on the floor, began to ripple upward. That night, Natalie sat alone at her desk, not with rage, but resolve. The real war wasn't in what they did to her. It was in how she responded. The fallout came faster than even Natalie expected. By the next morning, a quiet alarm had rung through Stratton Financial's upper ranks. Senior executives from HR, compliance, and public relations descended on the Raleigh branch like a silent storm. They weren't loud, but their presence said everything: something big had gone wrong. Natalie didn't need to be there to feel it. She knew how these institutions worked. Image was everything. And right now, Stratton's image was crumbling from the inside. Jessica, the teller who had thrown Natalie's ID like it was filth, was summoned into a sterile white meeting room. Across the table sat 3 people, a compliance officer, a lawyer, and a representative from HR. When they pressed play on the surveillance video and showed her the footage, her pinched expression, the ID tossed on the floor, the laughter shared with Rachel, she didn't speak for a long time. Jessica tried to defend herself. She looked suspicious, she didn't act like someone with real money. The lawyer cut her off. That's not a defense. That's profiling. Outside the door, Rachel waited for her turn. She'd already rehearsed her explanation, but it fell apart the moment they played audio from the cameras, her laughing, murmuring, "Better be careful, probably another fake." When asked directly, "Would you have said that if the customer were a white man in a tailored suit?" Rachel had no answer. Down the hall, Thomas Kent, the branch manager, sat in his office, hands steepled tightly in front of him. He was watching his career disappear piece by piece on a grainy security screen. When asked why he didn't intervene, why he dismissed a certified check from a key corporate partner without due diligence, his response was weak. "I didn't know who she was." The HR director's reply was cutting. "Exactly. And you didn't think she could be someone who mattered. That's the problem." He was given a choice: resignation or reassignment. He chose reassignment, but everyone knew his career at the bank had just flatlined. By the end of the week, Jessica was fired. Rachel was suspended indefinitely and ordered to complete a full anti-discrimination course. Ashley, the receptionist who had refused to even look at Natalie, submitted her resignation before they could force her to. But Natalie still hadn't said a word publicly. No press conferences. No tweets. No headlines. Instead, she worked. By the following Monday, Natalie launched something no one saw coming: Empower the Future, a leadership and financial training program focused on equipping young Black entrepreneurs, especially women, with the tools to walk into any boardroom or bank and never again be doubted. Classes filled within days. She taught the first session herself. "This program isn't about revenge," she told the room of 40 students. "It's about readiness. So when someone tells you, you don't belong here, you already know they're wrong." The room erupted in applause. And somewhere, in a quiet corner of the city, Rachel scrolled through a video clip of Natalie's speech, her eyes burning with something unfamiliar. Remorse. Word of Natalie's program, Empower the Future, spread faster than anyone anticipated. By the end of the second week, she had to rent a larger space. Students came from neighboring counties, some who'd never felt welcome in a bank, some who'd been turned away from loan officers for reasons that were never written down but always felt. They came in search of more than financial literacy. They came to reclaim dignity. And Natalie gave them that. One of them, a soft-spoken young woman named Keisha, lingered after class one day. "Miss Coleman," she said, eyes shining with tears she didn't let fall, "today was the first time I walked into a financial building and didn't feel like a burden. Not because they saw me differently, but because I saw myself differently." Natalie nodded, her voice low but powerful. "You don't need their permission to know your worth." Back at Stratton Financial, things were shifting. The top brass at corporate weren't just embarrassed, they were terrified. Internal auditors uncovered similar customer complaints at multiple branches. It was no longer just about Natalie. It was a pattern. A culture. Michael Andrews, the regional VP, acted fast. Mandatory diversity and bias training. New client treatment protocols. Anonymous reporting hotlines. Entire teams reshuffled. But one thing became clear: reforms without public accountability weren't enough. And so, in a rare act of corporate humility, Stratton Financial made a call to Natalie. They didn't ask for a press event or a photo op. They asked her to speak, privately first, then publicly, at the annual Raleigh Business and Entrepreneurship Conference, where hundreds of executives, investors, and city leaders would attend. Natalie hesitated. She wasn't interested in being a token success story, or someone they could parade around to say, "Look, we fixed it." But then she remembered that ID card. The silence. The way Ashley had waved her off. The way Jessica had sneered. She accepted. On the day of the conference, the ballroom buzzed with anticipation. Every seat was taken. Cameras were rolling, though Natalie had declined all interviews. Michael Andrews sat in the front row, face tight with a mixture of shame and hope. Just behind him was Thomas Kent, demoted, eyes low. And further back, Jessica, quiet and nearly unrecognizable, her usual confidence hollowed out by consequence. Then the MC took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our keynote speaker, CEO of Coleman Construction Group, founder of Empower the Future, and one of the most quietly impactful leaders in this city, Ms. Natalie Coleman." The room erupted in applause. Natalie walked calmly to the podium in a pearl-gray suit. She didn't carry notes. Her eyes scanned the room, calm and firm. "I'm not here to relive what happened," she said. "I'm here to ask one question." The room stilled. She paused. How would our world change, if we trusted people the first time we heard who they were? A silence fell. Not awkward. Not confused. Reverent. And as Natalie stepped back from the podium, applause rose like thunder. The applause lasted longer than Natalie expected. Not out of politeness, but because the room understood that something irreversible had just happened. A question, just one, had been planted like a seed in every heart and conscience present. Michael Andrews was the first to stand. Then others followed. Not everyone, but enough. Natalie didn't stay to bask in the attention. She left the stage with the same quiet grace that had defined her every move since the day Jessica threw her ID on the floor. As she stepped down, she passed Thomas Kent, whose eyes met hers for the first time in weeks. There was no defiance in them now, just regret. Later that evening, Natalie returned to the Empower the Future office. It was quiet, just the hum of the AC and the scent of coffee lingering from the afternoon mentoring session. She opened her laptop and found 2 emails waiting. The first was from Thomas Kent. Subject: a sincere apology. Ms. Coleman. I don't expect forgiveness. But I want you to know that what I allowed to happen under my watch was inexcusable. I dismissed your presence, your status, your dignity, not because of who you are, but because of who I failed to be. I've taken a position with the Community Business Initiative to help minority entrepreneurs access resources. I hope to spend the rest of my career undoing the harm I once contributed to. Thank you for opening my eyes. Thomas Kent. The second was handwritten, scanned and emailed, from Ashley. Ms. Coleman. I've thought about that day every single morning since. I know I didn't throw your ID, but I threw away the chance to treat someone with basic human respect. I've resigned from Stratton. I volunteer now at a shelter downtown, helping women re-enter the workforce. I don't expect anything in return. I just wanted you to know your silence taught me more than anyone's shouting ever could. Ashley. Natalie sat back, the screen glowing softly. She hadn't sought revenge. She had created accountability. Weeks passed. The incident faded from headlines, though it had never really been in them. Natalie had never given a press interview. She didn't need to. The most powerful stories aren't always the loudest. Sometimes, they unfold in changed minds, in quiet apologies, in programs that outlive the scandal. Empower the Future expanded to Charlotte and Richmond. A few months later, major firms began partnering with the initiative, offering internships, grants, and startup capital. Natalie had turned humiliation into a movement. One afternoon, as she was locking up her office, a young woman tapped her on the shoulder. "Miss Coleman. My name's Joy. You probably don't remember, but I was in your very first class. I just landed a loan from a bank that used to deny me, the same one, actually. I wore the blazer you told us to invest in. I looked the manager in the eye. And I told them what I was building." Natalie smiled. "And what did they say?" "They said yes." Natalie stood at her window as twilight settled over the city she'd once felt erased in. Raleigh's lights blinked on one by one, glowing like quiet affirmations, like proof that the world was still changing, slowly, but surely. And she had helped push that change into motion without screaming, suing, or surrendering her dignity. The inbox on her laptop was now flooded with messages, not just from young entrepreneurs like Joy, but from unexpected names. Executives, HR directors, school administrators, and even small-town mayors requesting she speak, consult, or help them replicate Empower the Future. She opened one message flagged as high importance. It was from a junior employee at Stratton Financial. Subject: Your story changed everything here. Dear Ms. Coleman. I wasn't part of the incident, but I work at the Raleigh branch. And I want you to know, everything feels different now. There's awareness, empathy, even fear, but mostly, respect. It used to be easy to laugh off bias. Now, no one dares. Because your presence, and your power, showed us what accountability looks like. Thank you for not walking away. Anthony M., Client Services Associate. Natalie leaned back in her chair, eyes misting just slightly. It wasn't about validation. It was about ripple effects, how one moment of cruelty had turned into hundreds of moments of courage. She turned off the monitor and walked to the shelf behind her desk. A small frame sat there now, holding the very ID card Jessica once threw on the floor. She'd kept it. Not as a reminder of shame, but of what she'd overcome, and how she overcame it. And how many others could too. Natalie Coleman could have sued. She could have gone viral. But she chose something far more powerful: transformation through action. She didn't just silence the prejudice. She redefined power. As she once said, dignity isn't loud. But when it moves, it changes everything. If Natalie's story inspired you, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to True Echo for more stories where justice doesn't knock, it builds. And drop a comment. Have you ever been underestimated, and quietly proved them wrong?